Hey, I'm Matt Ruby.
And I'm Rob Kramer, and welcome to another episode of Hell and Wellness.
I am a comedian, and I've been involved in the health and wellness space in a lot of ways, but also always like on the periphery.
And I'm a tech entrepreneur and a writer, and I've been pretty addicted to the health and wellness space for quite some time. Had a good role model and sort of physical fitness and athletics in my parents, but also have had a couple of hippies as brother and sister who are much older than I am, and have sort of pushed me into exploring all kinds of modalities.
I hear you. Yeah, my dad was super logical, analytical, didn't buy any hippie stuff. My mom, huge hippie, bohemian, artist, poet type. So that's where I am in my head. I'm always trying to figure out, like, okay, is this logical and does it make sense? Or is this like kind of like some hippy-dippy nonsense, or is it somewhere in between the two?
So, Matt, today we are going to talk about what seems to be a favorite topic amongst the general media, conspiracy theories, but more specifically, conspiracy theory addictions. Turns out that conspiracy theories can be every bit as much of an addiction as gambling or alcohol or sex, and they all kind of derive and emanate from the same part of the brain that sort of gets people addicted to chasing the rabbit around these conspiracy theories. So really looking forward to getting into that with you.
Yeah, that QAnon shaman, he's definitely chasing some rabbits around somewhere. I'll tell you that much.
Should we dive in?
Yeah, let's get into it. Conspiracy theory addiction. Let's talk about it. And quick note, we are not doctors. This is not medical advice. Don't take us that seriously and change your life and inject things or anything like that. We're here to entertain you, to give you our perspective on the world of wellness. So please, before you do anything serious, check with a doctor.
Of course, it's all connected. This conspiracy goes all the way to the top. That's right, I'm talking about the human brain. I'm Shannon, and I'm a neuroscience PhD candidate. And this is your brain on conspiracy theories.
So that was neuroscience PhD, as you heard, Shannon Odell. And, it turns out, Matt, that conspiracy theories could actually affect your health and well-being. And there is such a thing called conspiracy theory addiction. This is actually a thing. So let's just sort of start generally from the top. A conspiracy theory, we've all heard a shit ton about them in the last 4 years especially, can basically be defined as the belief that a secret but influential organization or individual is responsible for a circumstance or event. So people often think that these beliefs are rare, sometimes absurd, but research shows that they may actually be more common than we thought. Apparently, there's been a study that says that about 50% of Americans believe in at least one conspiracy theory. Who would have thought of this? I thought this was really just a QAnon thing and a Trump thing, but apparently conspiracy theories come in all forms, but most theories involve political and social events. So examples, we've seen a lot of them, but could include the belief that certain celebrities are immortal vampires. I can think of a few. And controversial topics such as the belief that a small group of people are planning to overthrow the government. Now, let me note that statement was actually scribed many years ago by a conspiracy theory addiction specialist. Who would have known that this person would have been prescient that on January 6th, that this small group of people actually would try to overthrow our government? So the people who strongly believe in conspiracy theories and become addicted may experience some of the following. So this is really where it gets a little weird for people. So they can feel anxious or fearful for no particular reason. There's a feeling of a loss of control, perhaps a need to make sense of complex topics or unrelated events, even with little or no topical knowledge. We've seen this happen, especially through clickbait on Facebook and Twitter. Many of these people tend to have low self-esteem. a strong urge to make connections between a series of unrelated events or behaviors. This is something that I find particularly fascinating because it's Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. It's a never-ending cycle of connecting the dots that really just don't ever and will never connect. Sometimes it's a belief in paranormal explanations for scientific phenomena, making sense of the universe. We all want that. I mean, religion could possibly, in some people's minds, be considered a conspiracy theory. A sense of not belonging or isolation. This tends to be a big driver here in 2021 for people who just don't feel like they're connected to a cause. Their lives are not particularly meaningful. They need a person like a Donald Trump to steer them in a direction so they could feel connected, like they actually have a purpose in their life. And many of these folks feel a great alienation, a disengagement, or disaffection from society. So it turns out that this is a behavioral addiction. I mean, it's like any other addiction. These are behavioral addictions or non-substance addictions, like gambling addictions, or sets of behaviors that people become dependent on and crave. And I think we're seeing the rise of conspiracy theory addictions. I didn't know it was a thing, but at the same time, I actually have been searching these last 4 years of what drives and motivates people to want to follow conspiracy theories. And one last thing about this is that these are not just, this condescending sort of version of conspiracy theory people. People who follow them are their uneducated white middle American male. These could be yoga moms. These could be the people from the spiritual community who follow the movie or the non-movie documentary movie Plandemic. They come from all stripes and all political spectrums. It's fascinating. We seem to be overwhelmed by them, and in fact, we seem to be having to confront them in unfortunate ways right now in our society and government.
Well, I heard most of that, Rob, but I was kind of focused on Dianne Feinstein's Chinese communist driver who's been working with General Tso to help overthrow the government, along with George Soros, through the Dominion voting machines in order to, sex traffic children to the Satan worshipers the way the Democratic Party has been doing for a while now. So you're aware of all that, right?
Of course. I mean, all that happened, right?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, so it's funny to me. I don't actually believe any of that. I guess I don't feel like I need to explain that, but maybe people don't know me that well. But yeah, I think to me, we get into interesting questions of what is a conspiracy theory and what is addiction. Because like a conspiracy theory, I believe that Big Pharma has, spread a bunch of, sort of phony disorders through our population in order to, subscribe us to their, medicines in a way that's not in our best interest. Am I a conspiracy theory kook, or am I just telling the truth about what's happening with, pharmaceutical pills in our culture? Same with factory farming and the big agriculture and Monsanto and how they're poisoning our crops and our seeds and feeding us poison because it's better for them economically. Am I a conspiracy theory kook, or am I just speaking the truth in a way that is stating the fact of, if you follow the money within capitalism, where it goes?
There's lots of opportunity probably for us to debate conspiracy theories and whether you're a kook or not. I mean, I actually think you're a kook, but that's beside the point. And I did believe you a few minutes ago. So now I think that all Democrats are part of pedophilia sex rings. That said, what's interesting to me is, and I'm fascinated by, is this notion that when you get down to the bottom of what drives conspiracy theories, there are things, according to the neuroscientists and the psychologists, that drive why people believe in conspiracy theories. And one of them is a need for understanding and consistency. Another is a need for control. And then a third, which they categorize and talk about, is a need to belong or feel special. So no matter what your conspiracy theory is, yours might be that Monsanto is trying to poison us, or Pfizer might be trying to inject us with, pharmaceuticals that put us on some kind of sort of pharmaceutically induced control, or you believe in QAnon. There's something underlying it that, we talked a little bit in a previous episode about conspirituality, which we won't go too much here. You should check out the episode. I think it's episode number 6, I believe. But this notion that there's a need for understanding when a person experiences distress over uncertainty or witnesses a large-scale event, that the mind will start to look for explanations that connect the dots. I mean, it's this age-old existential fear that we don't matter and that we're here today and gone tomorrow and no one's going to kind of notice.
And I get that, but I think there's this inherent judgment going on that I'm going to push back at, because like, I don't think that Pfizer is trying to like addict us with the vaccine, but I do think when they send hot pharmaceutical sales reps into doctors' offices and take them out to fancy dinners and then fly them to junkets and pay them, 6 figures to give a speech at a conference, and then they're like, hey, maybe you should start, prescribing our pills a little bit, that has an impact on it. And I don't think that I'm fulfilling some need I have within me because I'm lonely or, uneducated or something else. I think am literally seeing what predatory capitalism has done to our healthcare system, and I'm trying to point it out and get people to be aware of it. And like, where does that fall on this spectrum? Because I don't want to take this too far afield, because overall I agree with you on the typical Illuminati kind of bullshit conspiracy theories. But then I fear that I get lumped in with people who think, under the Denver airport, the Illuminati are meeting, when I'm like, no, I'm just telling you what capitalism is doing. Like, I don't think I'm a conspiracy theory kook. I think I'm pointing out what predatory capitalism is doing to our healthcare system. And like, I'm just trying to, like, I think we all need to be aware of that.
I would say that there is a fine line between judging or determining what is a out and out kooky conspiracy theory versus a theory that capitalism is maligning our humanity, so to speak. But at the same time, all conspiracy theories require some level of judgment and analysis and opinion that you're going to fall on one side of the so-called theory or another. And while I may not subscribe to, the tactics that you describe as being that pharmaceutical companies engage in as being conspiracy theory, I can understand intellectually why you would say that, but I'm really thinking more there. We live in a society of human beings that have a collective consciousness, and as Lily Tomlin, the comedian, said once in her one-woman show, when she posed the question, "What is reality?" And she answers it by saying that reality is a collective hunch. And we all have a collective hunch. There are certain hunches that we all agree on. There are certain hunches that we think that guy's crazy to be thinking that. And then there's certain hunches that are just completely on the fringe. I think that when we're talking conspiracy theories, and the focus that I'm trying to place on this is that there are certain types of behavior that will drive people to think about things that are completely out of the so-called mainstream, and that they're driven by these 3 things that I mentioned, this need for understanding, consistency at an extreme level, the need for control at an extreme level because their lives are feeling particularly out of control, or this need to feel special or belonging. The shaman, QAnon shaman, who got up in the middle of the Senate and stood and screamed at the top of his lungs, who's wearing the crazy horns and the beard and the painted face, clearly needs a little bit of attention, needs to belong. Is he wrong for believing certain things about the government? Perhaps not. Perhaps he could prove some of those things. Who knows? But what drove him versus you and I to take that action to storm the Capitol when, in fact, we may actually think that some of the things he might be alluding to have some validity? But I just think that, you and I are not storming the Capitol, and you and I are having a rational discussion of which there are opinions that we're going to debate. I just think that the conspiracy theory addiction that I'm talking about, in the same way, I may bet on a couple of football games on a Sunday afternoon, that does not make me a gambling addict.
Yeah, I think if I had to like kind of frame what you're talking about, is like we spent a lot of time looking at these conspiracy theories, sort of, I would call them the weeds in the garden, instead of examining the soil that has been so fertile for them to kind of grow in. And I think you mentioned a lot of them. I think we're underestimating the pandemic and people being locked down and isolated, and how much that has accelerated. I think that's the perfect sort of manure in the soil to get people to start believing in these sort of crackpot theories. You know, when people are lonely and disconnected and online all the time, I think there's a real sort of video game aspect to it, especially with the QAnon theory, how there's like this mysterious stranger dropping clues and you need to solve them. I actually read a long article by a video game designer talking about how this is classic game design, and how it's almost like it's a video game that's playing us instead of us playing a video game. And it's sort of using this fertile soil of us being lonely and disconnected and locked down and not having purpose and not having community. And then the other thing I'll throw in there, which you brought up, the topic of religion, I think as our culture moves more and more away from organized religion, we're seeing that desire for things like that gets filled by other things. I think you see the rise in things like astrology, the rise in conspiracy theories, the rise of other things, because we do, on some biological level, want to believe in higher powers and things that are connecting the universe and bringing it, and you know, that it's not just all chaos and randomness. And religion used to give us one, I would say, you know, in retrospect, one sort of healthy sort of template for bullshit that we could believe in, and we got rid of that. And we're like, no, that's bullshit, get rid of that. But then we've just like opened the floodgates to this whole other direction of bullshit that's even more nefarious and potentially causing more harm.
So let's play another clip from Shannon Odell. She's going to give us a little perspective from a neuroscience and brain perspective as to how some of these sort of disparate pieces that we're talking about might come together in the mind.
The brain pays attention to information simply because it agrees with the current belief, while disregarding anything to the contrary. Ironically, the explosion of information on the internet may have made the problem worse, not better. Conspiracy theorists can now accumulate lots and lots of misinformation, creating communities and echo chambers, which only act to reinforce their conspiracy beliefs.
So, look, there is a lot of stuff happening in the brain. She goes very deep into the neurochemical reactions that happen when someone actually does go down the rabbit hole of a conspiracy theory. And to your point about game theory and video game technique and social media, these are things that obviously amplify that which already exists. Conspiracy theories have been around from the beginning of humanity and the beginning of time. We're just seeing it in its sort of almost post-mortem, in the sense that, like, we're seeing the worst parts of the mind sort of laying bare before us, sort of as roadkill, and everyone just is sort of stepping on it and driving over it, and then people are getting up and going, you know, you just fucking ran over me. Like, I matter. I actually believe these things. I get they're not mainstream. And now there's all these tunnels, these silos of support for some rather wacky things, whether I agree with them or not. And some of them I agree with parts of them, and some of them I think that you're just out of your fucking mind. But they exist, and we are now living in a society that is particularly sick with conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and I think our brains haven't changed, so it's really wise to look at what has changed, what's happened in the past 5, 10, 15
I disagree
years.
with that. I disagree with that, actually. I think our brains have fundamentally changed since the advent of phones and computers and smartphones and texting. And, you know, there was an article in Wired Magazine now 10 years ago called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" And I think our brains are always being rewired. They're very plastic and malleable things. They're absolutely changing constantly.
And I would argue that our brains are being flooded and can't keep up with what's happening. I think we probably agree on some level with the source, but maybe just the methods here. But I think technology and, you know, our addiction to devices, being online all the time, has led our brains to, you know, not be able to keep up with the flood of information that's coming at them. And then I think the other thing is the collapse of trust in our institutions. We used to have institutions that we believed in.
Yeah.
Walter Cronkite would tell us the news and we would believe it. That there would be experts that, we'd be like, well, that person's an expert. I trust them. And we've completely lost that in society due to technology and a lot of the things that have happened with social media and elsewhere. And I think, this is a manifestation of that. And when we lose trust in our institutions, all of a sudden everything's up for grabs.
Yes, except for the fact that there were those who argue that a 3-network media landscape and a Walter Cronkite as the sort of father of America tuning in at 7 o'clock every night is actually in and of itself a conspiracy theory. Because we now have one single source or 3 sources of information, and information is incredibly difficult in that environment incredibly easy in that environment to control. And now, the lid is blown off and we have billions of different sources and everyone gets to believe whatever they want to believe. Does that map onto the existing brain that is evolving in real time? Or is it actually just sort of confusing the brain that hasn't changed? And I think they're not mutually exclusive. They are one and the same. The information in, information out, garbage in, garbage out.
So we were better off when we were getting information. We had trusted institutions and news sources, or we were worse off?
Well, I think this is something to argue, but my point is that there was definitely a more coherent agreement around who and what we trust. Institutions, we were all mostly in agreement because all day long, as I would say, to friends, if CNN broadcast 24/7 every day, or for that matter, every single network broadcast every single day, whether it was in the days of Walter Cronkite or today, potatoes will kill you. Eating potatoes will kill you. And every story and every headline was eating potatoes will kill you. No one would eat potatoes. No one would grow potatoes. No one would get in sniffing distance of potatoes. We are willing to believe whatever it is we are told to believe. Now we live in a time when there's many billions of disparate sources of information. And now everyone believes what they choose to believe because they just resonate with the things that amplify their belief system. But in that sort of the billions of sources of information that we have, our brains are changing. And now we live in a society where we trust no one. We can't even trust the president of the United States. We can't trust sometimes our neighbor. We can't trust the police. Black people can't trust the police. I can't trust this one or that one because I'm Jewish. Do they know I'm Jewish? Well, who knows? I mean, is that something we have no common bond and no common definition around trust. Conspiracies, I think, are the malignant tumor that essentially has metastasized in our society based upon the fact that we've lost trust in each other and in our beliefs. And conspiracy theories are simply the paradigm for expressing the malignancy that exists.
All right. Yeah, I guess it's interesting for me because I grew up like a rock and roll, like kind of fuck the man kind of guy. Institutions are bullshit. And the past 5 years have me really longing for, just institutional like control and the man and agreed upon set of truth. And that we're all like kind of buying in a way that I never would have predicted for myself.
And I love that. And I actually, believe it or not, agree with you. I kind of long for that too. The challenge is that because we have individuated ourselves in a mediated society, a society that is mediated by everything from network, cable, blogs, politicians, corporations, brands, etc. We don't know what to believe because we've lost our sense of who we are individually, and we've lost our sense of connection with everyone as a whole. We don't live in a society. We live on our own worlds that we then sort of pick and choose the things that we want to actually believe based on the brand that we've created for ourselves in our own little worlds called our brain.
Yeah, I'm just going to stand up for our brains. I feel like we're just being asked to be an expert on everything. Like, like, who has time to be like an expert on vaccines, an expert on epidemics, an expert on, race relations in America and redlining, an expert on, agriculture, an expert on pharmaceuticals. Like, it's just sort of like too much. I just think we're asking our brains to do too much. And I think our brains are like just being like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Maybe this crazy stuff. How about that?
Yeah. Look, I think the bottom line is that as a human being who, as a species, by and large, there's this existential threat called death. We all know it's going to happen. We all don't know how or when or why. And so we have these needs to feel safe and be in control. And conspiracy theories and conspiracy theory addiction can be caused by this need to feel safe and in control. And it's really just spun out of control. And so the more it's spun out of control, the more conspiracy theory rabbit holes we seem to collectively, or perhaps, in segments of society, fall down. And when the human mind feels threatened, identifying what is causing the danger can be a way to cope with anxiety. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in society now because we just don't know which way is up.
Yeah, and we're freaking out. And it's funny because probably in a lot of ways we're healthier and better off and luckier than anyone who's ever, walked on the face of the earth. Yet we feel like everything's crumbling all around us. So it's like one of those things. It's sort of like the wealthier people get, the more freaked out they are about losing it.
So I know we tend to look at everything in the sort of hell or well perspective. I'm going to say that, of course, by matter of opinion, that conspiracy theories in the way we understand them in 2021 are complete and utter hell. But I'm going to give conspiracy theories, or what's underlying the driver behind conspiracy theories, not a hell or a well at all, but something that we need to become more aware of, and why we are actually living in this world where conspiracy theories have overtaken our society in ways that have actually almost toppled our government for the first time in the history of our government. And I think that if we spend our time condescending and demeaning people around the extreme conspiracy theorists, and I don't agree with 99.99% of them, so I'm saying that from this perspective, I think we need to figure out what's going on below the conspiracy theory that you most likely don't agree with. Don't make it hell. Don't make it well. Let's just sort of come together and understand what's happening here so we can actually have more trust in each other.
I agree with you. And I think, it's obviously, if you're an addict to conspiracies, that is not healthy. I'll even go to the framework of like, what can we do about this? What's actually like a solvable thing right now? And I think it's the technology companies that are fomenting this need to be regulated and examined. And we need to start looking at these algorithms and, companies like Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and what's happening, and start saying like, hey, you're leading to the destruction of our society. We as a country are going to do something about it. And, I'm going to lump that in there too. So obviously it's a hell from me.
Well, good. Well, I have a feeling that what you just alluded to is going to be another episode, and we are going to talk about the health and wellness of technology in our lives. Thanks for listening to Hell and Wellness. I'm Rob Kramer.
And I'm Matt Ruby. You can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can leave voice messages for us at anchor.fm/hellandwellness. That's anchor.fm/hellandwellness. You can also see all the shows there. And you can email us at hellandwellness@gmail.com.
And if you remember, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Say something nice.
Thanks for listening.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.